Week 13. We are so closing in on the end of the semester. So good for you for hanging in there and for watching these videos if you have been. It's a special student who wants every possible supplement to the content of a course, even if it involves a teacher with newly rainbowed hair. By the way, pray funny. I just go into the salon and say, do what you want, and then they go, wee, and I go, whoa, and that's how it goes. So for week 13, you have readings as usual. First, you have three poems by an Irish poet, Hiroshima, The Northern Ireland Question and Peace by Desmond Egan. Then you have a story, Crocodile by Albert Wendt, and a story, The Loons by Margaret Lawrence. So let's see a question related to each of these three authors' works for this week, just something to kind of get your brain to wake up to them and perhaps think of new ways to kind of crack into those works and see their applications outside of just how you might discuss them in the class, but to consider them as works where you might take lessons or thoughts beyond the class with you into the rest of your days. So the three poems that you're asked to read this week deal with war, very specifically the bombs dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. And then there's a couple poems related to the troubles that occurred in Northern Ireland from the late 1960s until the late 1990s when peace was established. If you don't know much about the troubles, just kind of a quick overview for you would be that we talk in the United States about Ireland. In fact, there are two Irelands. So there's the Republic of Ireland, which is an independent nation, largely Catholic. There's Northern Ireland. That's a separate country. And Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. So its governance it's lumped together with England, Wales, Scotland, and then there's Northern Ireland. And largely the citizens of Northern Ireland are Protestant. So the Troubles sometimes are cast as being a Catholic versus Protestant kind of war, but it really was more of a kind of constitutional conflict in which some of those in Northern Ireland were wanting to free themselves from the chains or the oversight of being part of Great Britain and wanting to be a united Republic of Ireland, independent country, all the Irish in one country. And so there were armed conflicts, there were a lot of bombings, and more than, I think, 3,500 people were killed. So there have been some pretty famous movies about this subject, and it's very, very interesting for those of us. I mean, my family came from Northern Ireland in the 1840s, which is when the potato famine was happening. And so a lot of us who have connections to Ireland or who, let's be honest, just romanticize Ireland nowadays, it can be very interesting for us to read more about the Troubles. So if you're one of those people, these poems are your first taste of some of that. They're short, they're quick, but there's books, there's novels, there's movies that cover this. But the question I want to ask you is, war and violent armed conflict are relatively removed from the lives of most Americans. I'm not saying entirely. I'm just saying in our daily lives, we aren't constantly worried that a bomb is going to go off if we go to the post office to deliver a letter. So how might this remoteness from violence affect the way you perceive and judge the lives of others? So as a hard question, I realize, and it's sort of speculative as well, but it is good, I think, number one, for us to really acknowledge and take stock of how safe we mostly feel in the United States. Now, there's many things that can be said about guns and violence towards certain groups in the United States more than others. So I'm not trying to gloss over any of that. But I am also trying to say that in the United States, we do live with a daily feeling of safety that is not known in many countries, particularly where there are wars or where there's, let's say, tribal conflicts going on. And so sometimes we have opinions that we form. We read stuff in the news, on Twitter, and you get ideas about, the role the United States should play, or you judge people in other countries, or you get a stance about immigrations and immigrants wanting to come to the United States. But if you really think about the realities for them of never knowing if they're just going to dodge out and get some orange juice for the baby, they're just as likely to never come home again because they're going to get killed. And so I think that sometimes just kind of stopping ourselves to ask these questions can make us, I know I use the word a lot, make us very empathetic towards the lives of other people around the world. And so I just would say that you could use these poems, these 3 poems, as a moment to kind of stop and say, I don't even know about a lot of the conflicts that have happened or are currently happening around the world. You could look at some countries in Africa for appalling demonstrations of violence. And if you think, like we live in Minnesota, we have a huge Somali population in Minnesota. Why is that? And why did so many of those Somalis come first from refugee camps in Kenya? What's going on in Kenya? What's going on in Somalia? Like, read up on that a little bit before you form your opinions. So I'm just saying that, like, reading these poems gives you permission in your life to pause and to think, so the ideas I have in my head, are they based on a certain lack of acknowledgement of the lives, the realities of the lives of people around the world? Okay, there you go. Next, I have a question for you regarding Crocodile, the story of a teacher who is somewhat, I don't know if harassed is the right word, but where we see the students in the school treating that teacher with a certain attitude, and then realizing, as by the end of the story, that in fact this teacher was just a person. And it just, for me, it brings up that idea. It gives me moments where I think, oh yeah, I remember kind of that I was on a gradual realization through my whole life, in fact, to really understand that, like, my parents are not just my parents, these things, that made rules or helped me do things, but my parents are human beings and therefore allowed to not be perfect. And I know that's true when I think of some teachers I had. So sort of these figures that play a big role in your psyche sometimes, and they can be intimidating. You might view them with fear. You might view them with loathing. And then as time passes and maybe you move away from them a little bit, you start to realize they are just people, and all of us people are usually doing the best we can. So I would just ask you to kind of cast your brain back through your life, sift through those memories, and can you think of an authority figure in your life, could be a boss even, who initially seemed Leviathan. There's a good vocabulary word for you, friends. Leviathan is like huge, massive, you could describe a whale as Leviathan, like this huge thing. So an authority figure who, originally was like, whoa, and then you came to see them over time as flawed, nuanced, and human. And I think that discovery is part of maturing. It's an important part of growing up. And for some of us, even when we're in our 50s, we're still growing up, I'm here to tell you. And for the final story, the loons, we encounter perhaps the kind of prejudice and racism that we're most used to, instead of the hidden, subterranean, and systemic racism that it seems like many Americans are only just starting to unearth. In this story, we have some characters who are métis, which is sometimes derogatorily referred to as being half-breed, so a mixture of being indigenous and of Euro-American ancestry. And so this story brings up a whole lot of things about our prejudices. And I can say I grew up in Billings, Montana, which is near the Crow Reservation. And the negative stereotypes and the racism that I grew up with unthinkingly, because it was embedded into everything I encountered regarding people who lived on the reservation. Unbelievable. Like, now that I've grown up enough and see it, it's kind of like, I cannot believe the things that everyone at my high school or everyone in my city said and thought. It's appalling, really. And I know that we, for example, after 9/11, saw unbelievable amounts of unfounded hatred and suspicion of Muslim Americans. And so my question for you would be to consider if any of those kinds of prejudices have gotten into your brain without you even knowing it. I mean, it's almost impossible to say, no, never, not at all. So the question here is, has there been an instance in your life when your perceptions about another person's background actually got in the way of knowing that person? And I think for many of us, if we've had that kind of prejudice ingrained into us, it often does take knowing just one person from the group that is being oppressed, and then our eyes start to open. And I mean, this is true also of LGBTQ individuals, where you can live with blinders, but once you meet one actual human being, and you kind of go, oh, this is a fantastic human being. What was I thinking? It helps kind of strip away some of those prejudices to actually get to know someone. So I know for me, living in Montana in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, I worked at the Rimrock Mall, scooping ice cream at a shop called Hipster Dugan. And when a fellow employee was hired named Marie, and she was from the Crow Reservation, I really was able to kind of go, oh, wow, I need to shut my stupid mouth and open up my stupid brain and get better. Because Marie was smart and funny and self-aware and willing to talk about any issue, willing to talk about, life as a member of the Crow Nation. So she was one of those people that helped unlock my thinking, and I'm forever grateful to her. So I'm just wondering if there have been people in your life where maybe you just thought, nope, don't. Maybe you see a woman in hijab and you think, I'd be scared to talk to her. I don't even know how I'd talk to her. It's just a person. So, I'm wondering if you've ever had those moments where you realize that you didn't get to know someone simply because you had preconceptions, perhaps culturally, perhaps in terms of religion, politics, whatever, where you sort of maybe had a missed opportunity. So those are some things to consider this week as you are reading, discussing, and then as you're moving on through your life beyond this class.